Hey everybody, Sarah at Nova again. This week we have a pretty cool 1 year only kind of machine. We had a little sneak peek of it a couple weeks ago, but we're finally digging into working on it, so we figured we'd talk about it. What we have here is the 1982 Kawasaki KZ1000 Eddie Lawson replica, known as an ELR. Um, this is sort of a pivotal bike just as far as marketing goes, for one, for sure, but also just it really defines the end of the first superbike era. For those who don't know, Eddie Lawson, famous motorcycle racer, very successful. He was one of the early first generation AMA superbike racers, and the superbike class when it came out really just meant big motorcycles, 1000cc. Might have started at 750, but they got up to 1000cc four cylinders, the Japanese universal Japanese motorcycles, the inline fours. And so they were, stuff like CB750s, KZ1000s, GS1000s, stuff like that. But as you can see, very simple cradle frame still, air-cooled motor across the frame, very much a first-generation superbike. And this bike came out in '82. It was based on the Eddie Lawson's title-winning '81 bike. When we say based on, we mean mostly it's a styling exercise. It's a pretty standard KZ1000 with some cool bits from the about to be released GPC 1100 that was about to come out. So the tail section, the cowl, the tank, which is not on it, which is up in safekeeping, those were actually snagged from the newer bike and just painted in Eddie Lawson's racing green for the replica version. So let's see. It's basically the motor is based on the Z1. We've got a Z1 restoration we're doing here, but Z1 was one of the very first pivotable super bikes, and it's just a 1000cc version of that motor. Puts out about 100 horsepower, pretty good for its time, pretty scary for this frame. Other than that, it's got stuff like this factory oil cooler. This one is routed a little differently than the stock one was. We think that they were just doing this since the stock one kind of comes down through the headers and up around. We think this is just keeping it in front of the airstream to keep it a little bit cooler when you're running it hard. It came with a factory Kerker pipe. When I say factory, I mean when you bought it from the dealer. It was sort of a dealer special, assembled, kind of inspired by the dealers in Southern California. And they sort of said, hey, let's take these cool parts and make what a production, amateur racer might make for themselves. So you got a Kerker pipe that came new on it. This may be a reproduction. And you got triple disc brakes all around. These shocks are not original. Forks are really typical of his era, but nothing to speak of. Pretty spindly, right side up kind of stuff. Pistons are single piston calipers. Wheels were cast, not cutting edge at this point, pretty much to the norm of this era, but pretty good. It looked cool. It went fast in a straight line. You could, if you really knew what you were doing, you could bang it into some corners and hang on tight. And they sold a bunch. It was as a marketing exercise, it was almost a little reminiscent of what Harley was about to do. Take an out-of-date bike that wasn't selling well, gussy it up a little bit, give it a little heritage, give it a little history, and some flashy paint, and send it out the door. So they were cool. In the late 90s, early 2000s, Kawasaki brought back the Eddie Lawson replica in the form of the ZRX, and it was a liquid-cooled motor, but based on the styling of this with the square headlight, cowl, same stripes, and I've always thought that was one of the coolest machines. It was one, sort of the beginning of the retro era, where bikes started to intentionally look a little older, and it's kind of cool to have. Now that those bikes are probably considered retro, this is the original of that retro. What else about this machine? This one it's not an original bike. It's definitely been restored. This is from a customer of ours who has a couple of these 80s bikes. He has the GPZ 1100 with fuel injection that we worked on before. If we get that bike back here, we'll have to shoot it because that's a cool one. He's got a bunch of really cool 80s Japanese machines for the most part. He's a super enthusiast, and he likes his stuff very pretty. So we are getting this bike started. You see the carbs are off. I'm going to do a carb clean on it. We've got it mostly done. And then other than that, we're just kind of going through and making stuff a little bit nicer. You can see that there's rust happening on the bolts here. There's some chipping on the side engine covers. And we're just going to make this thing really, really nice and clean. So new hardware there. We're going to recoat the covers. Possibly redo this valve cover, Going to put some Ohlins on the rear, not going to original shocks, but going for a nice performance upgrade. And then he wants to save this Kerker, make sure it doesn't get damaged. So he's going to pull this off and we'll put a Delcovic on. That's basically the spec of it, mostly a cosmetic upgrade. Yeah, we'll have to get this video of this thing running before it goes and before we pull this Kerker off, because the Kerker, I mean, Delcovics are great, but this Kerker sounds amazing. This is the one of the original superbike pipes. This and like a Bassani from the 70s. Super cool sound. Makes an inline four sound as good as they possibly can. So other than 4x4 GP bikes, don't get on me about that. That's a whole nother world. So, but yeah, let us know if you have any experience with these things, any memories of these things. If you were a Wes Cooley fan and think the GS1000 is a far better machine, let us know. Love those battles, and getting a look if that's sacrilege to say that, but I might be on the Wes Cooley camp on that side too. Yeah, early superbike stuff. As if you've watched the other movies we have about this stuff, I particularly love this era. I think it's super cool where technology is just crashing into itself, and the engines are just blowing away the chassis, and everybody's doing what they can to keep up, and the riders are doing what they can to hang on, and it's a lot of fun. Right after this, the Honda Interceptor V4 came out. The Ninja ZX or GPZ came out. A couple years later, the FZ Yamaha came out with 20 valves in the cylinder head. The Suzuki GSX-R 750 came out a couple years after this. So this is really the end of the first era and just before the beginning of the new one. So pretty cool. So yeah, please chime in the comments. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching.